Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for drifting in as we recuperate from the running late session. I'd hate to tear you away all from the networking downstairs because to me that's always the best part of the conference. But thank you, and welcome to our session on the future of work. As you've heard throughout the first day and a half of the New Cities Foundation Summit, we've talked about cities, we've talked about public space, we've talked about the arts, we've talked about many of the things that make cities great. And the one thing we haven't really spoken about that much until now is work, which is what we spend so much of our lives actually doing in spaces designed specifically for that purpose. And so the object of this session, which I hope will be wide-ranging and will cover a lot of different grounds, is to look at how notions of work are changing in cities, how our attitudes towards work are changing, and also how the typical notion of where work gets done, and by this I sort of mean white-collar work, knowledge work, what we consider to be the most sort of productive and value-adding work for cities, is moving out of the office into other forms. I mean, we have built, what I find fascinating is that in the dense cores of our cities, where we praise density and walkability, we have built these massive structures known as office buildings, which are rarely full. There have been studies, for example, by the architect Frank Duffy that says that offices are only occupied 60% of the time at their peak, and much of the time, weekends and nights are empty. And so how can we look at alternatives to activate office space? How do we look at alternatives to the office itself, and how is work changing over there? So with us to discuss these sort of wide-ranging questions, I have with us, to my immediate left is Ido Rocha, who is the founder of his eponymous architecture firm, an architect here in Sao Paulo who's working on, among other projects, the Petrobras headquarters, 200,000 square meters. So a man who is no stranger to designing and building office space. To his left is Corey Lowndes, who is the vice mayor of Rotterdam, which, as you may be familiar, of course, is one of the smaller yet more famous cities in the Netherlands, in the Randstad. Best known, as I was telling her, as a theme park for architects who famously made it their home. To her left is Lorenzo Bustani, who is the founder and CEO of Mandala, which is sort of an innovation consultancy that works with businesses to sort of bridge the gap between sort of social good and social purpose and their own sort of business objectives. So he's essentially expanding the notion of stakeholdership to all. And then finally, to his left is Eric Vandenbroek, who is the co-founder of a co-working space in Paris, Mutinerie, and then is also the creator of CoPass, which is one of the world's first sort of multi-city co-working networks. And if you're unfamiliar with the notion of co-working, I'll let Eric discuss, but it's the idea of working in spaces that are non-traditional offices with people who are your peers but not necessarily your colleagues. So you're working alone together is the classic way of saying it. And so there's really interesting developments going on in these spaces. So with that, I will dive in. We'll start asking our questions here. Please keep coming in and taking seats as you have the chance. The first question I'd like to direct towards Ido, which is the notion of, we have been building for a century now, essentially the office tower as we know it, stacked vertical floors in the cores of cities. Even though work itself has changed. I mean, in the beginning, the office was a factory for pushing paperwork. Now we're trying to find new ways to collaborate and innovate. And so I was hoping you could talk a bit about, sort of the relationship between the office and the city, this greater environment for collaboration and people, and how your own work has changed, and how you see sort of the office building evolving, because you have more experience than anyone else in this room with you.
I don't know if I start showing some image that I have. I know that image talk a little bit more than, and I'm going to explain a little bit more my experience, and in the middle I will answer your question, okay? Good? So I don't know if it's ready or not. Okay. So basically I start my architecture looking for urban planning, but I couldn't do it. So then I start in another part that is architecture itself. It's not working. It's not working. Okay.
There we go.
So this is about 25, 26 years ago. Looking for proposals, some ideas for the São Paulo. So that's why I wanted to show you. It's this train line was an old train line done by the British on last century, about 1875, 1890, something like that, and it's still there and it's not used. And there is about more than 30 million square meter of industries that are not used. And in the beginning, I was in the Secretary of Planning for the government of São Paulo, and the idea is to move industry to the interior of the country and not to live in the inside of São Paulo. And so then I beginning to prepare this project. And we showed to the municipality, and just now, 25 years later, something are happening. Something very, very small. And this is something that I sometimes didn't trust on ideas of good, big changings of urban planning like this. So because this we change everything. We make a big area that you can work, live, have leisure, culture, everything during all this line that is in the middle of the industrial line of the city. There is a lot of empty spaces, and we plan for all the stations. And for instance, this station is just a station for culture and music and so far. So there is we work for the whole city, and unfortunately nothing happened. Okay, so that's why sometimes I'm a little bit disappointed about the government, because the government normally cannot do everything that they want. And we saw some very nice explanation about how difficult it is for putting together the projects that the population need, right? So this is some of the ideas that happened during that time. But right now, what we are facing is a huge explosion of number of people, and the world is with a huge population, and a lot of them come to the cities. But on the other hand, there are a lot of problems during how nature is against us. Nature is not happy with what we are doing. And the most important and the most impressive is the amount of CO2 that we are producing. So we have here in the image what is the amount of tons of CO2 that United States and China and the rest of the world made in 2003, and what's happened in 2025. So we are in a big problem, not a small problem. We are in a huge problem about CO2. If we don't find a way, some ideas, good ideas, to solve the problem, and this need to start in the city. So, in my opinion, about because some of the slides are in Portuguese, but the idea of sustainability, I understand that sustainability is only energy conservation and the conservation of electricity, water, our electricity that we have every day to work, and the most important is how we can control CO2. If we done these three things, we can start. If we don't, we cannot start. We cannot understand sustainability. And there is a lot of ways to minimize, to make it efficient. And this is basically the matrix that we're using in almost all our buildings. So the buildings need to be sustainable, need to be producing this own energy, need to be efficient on that. And because 48% of the buildings that consume the whole energy. So if we don't have these buildings efficient, there is no way to save energy and to have the energy in the conservation. But now, beginning to answer your question, I understand that is in this century, we start with the office non-electric, then it start with electric, then it start electronic, now we are in a digital. We don't even know the amount of change we have on the digital and probably on the holography, and it's going to be a big change. We are in the time that we don't know if the past can show us what to do in the future, because we are really running with a lot of change, and I believe this is a big situation. Some years ago, I designed this working space that I believe is going to be something on the future. It's about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and right now maybe the iPad can do everything without a minimum of stuff. Why? Because there is a lot of changing on the use of this kind of digital workspace. And I believe most of the companies didn't realize yet about this change. We are doing projects, we are doing office, we are doing companies that is still thinking in an old way. And we cannot move them to this new proposal. It's very difficult. They have a very strong connect to the past. So the smartphone, the fast track on the information, there is a lot of new technology that sometimes are very difficult to change the culture of the companies. And the companies are, they are moving much more fast, but they still moving slowly in my point of view. So that's why I think that we have a new model coming in. And I cannot tell you what should be the next step, but what I'm saying that we are in a movement of changing very fast. So there is in the co-work, there is a lot of companies, let's say, that make together the co-work, the creation, the control, and how to compete. There are, let's say, the 4 types of companies that exist and how they manage their job. So there are different companies with different kinds of nature of work, but people still how they are, you know. So that's basically is in a moment of the big change because of digital.
Okay? Well, thank you for that, because that's a great framing, I think, for this whole session there. And I think you hit 2 points in particular, which I thought were great. One is the sustainability aspect of this. I mean, we've basically built tremendous amounts of unsustainable infrastructure. I mean, my favorite example in New York, one of the most famous, iconic office buildings, the Seagram building, designed by Mies van der Rohe and then copied endlessly, was recently judged to be perhaps the least sustainable building in New York. It's all plate glass and steel from the 1960s, has no insulation. It's a disaster environmentally. And yet, this is the model that we have used for the office. And the second point is you touched upon some various models of this, and I want to jump to Eric on this to talk about one of these models, which is co-working, because I found it interesting that you designed a sort of cubicle of the future when co-working and other stuff is pointing to, if I have a laptop, I can and will work from anywhere in any condition. So, Eric, I would hope you could talk a bit about, I guess, sort of the co-working revolution and sort of the changes you've seen then and how people are approaching where and when and with whom they're working.
Yeah, sure. So first, yes, we came, the idea of, actually it wasn't even an idea of co-working, it was more like a need that we have, because when you're used to work, and especially as a student, you used to work with your laptop and everywhere, and you don't really understand. It's really a cultural shock. You don't really understand that you've got to come to an office and sit at the same desk every day. And I think that's the first thing. Combined with the fact that there's kind of a social contract that has been a bit broken between, I think, companies and employees, and the security that companies provided you with is kind of an illusion today. You've got all the ingredients for a change, and actually the co-working space we created. So it's based on that observation, on that gap between how companies could operate and how they kept on operating. Actually, it really was about that, and so the thing is, you can work from virtually anywhere with a laptop and smartphone and even a tablet, or I don't know. The thing is, when you start to envision a future where you work on your own all the time, I think it sucks, you know. And the connected loneliness is no better than corporate slavery when you think about it. So the idea was, we still need places. We still need places to meet, to mate. And so the question was, what's the new role of these spaces? And for me, the new role was the heart of these new spaces should be social interaction and collaboration, because it's how you build trust, and you need trust to build projects and to build big projects. And so the idea was, okay, so now if you strip the office of its just utility, like bringing capital and workforce on the same place, you know, what's this new office space will look like? And so we had this idea of a collaborative space where independent workers, so it can be graphic designers, developers, journalists, consultants, startups, or medium-sized company can work. And most of all, they join a community of talents and of different projects. And so we started doing that. We also thought that these places, as they put the emphasis on the flow of ideas and on diversity, they should also host lots of events. So we're also an event space. We hosted lots of different events, more than 100 through the last year, and some conferences, more traditional conferences, but also crazy events like where people would come and peel vegetables to make a giant soup, and just listening to electronic music, you know, it's like, and distributing to the streets. So it was very, very different spaces, and I think this is very interesting. The fact that in a digital age we still need places is something that really struck me a lot, and you cannot just say you can work from here. I think it would be like really a mistake to do things like this. It would be very unproductive. So we still need offices, but a different kind of, and you don't need the same every day, as I.
Well, with regards to that, I mean, how are members using CoPass as a network in cities? I mean, do you see people surfing across cities then from office to office to office during the day, depending on their mood, depending on how they use it? If we're not sitting in one place every day, how are we working? Do we keep the habits as students, or what have you seen in terms of how people use co-working and use your spaces?
So actually, I think most of the people have a mothership, what do we call a mothership? So they've got a place where they usually work most of the time. But these people are by nature very, very flexible and mobile. And when you're an independent worker, and even in a company today, you're never really on holiday, and you're always a bit at work. And if you have to be at work, you can do it from nice places. That's my take. I mean, it's more pleasant to receive a call from your boss at midnight if you're close to the beach than if you're in the same office building. You know, so that's the idea. So we see these people having a mothership and traveling a lot. Then there is another population of people that really are nomadic people, and the center of their life is mobility. They constructed a lifestyle around mobility, and this is a tiny portion of the population, but that is growing quite fast because the lifestyle is very appealing. I think people are really looking for experiences today, more than just consumption of countries. You know, when you're a country, you just sit in a hotel and consume the beach and consume the local products, and you know, people are looking for experiences. So it's a kind of a slow way of traveling, like where you in a country. I came here 3 weeks before the meeting. I went to Rio and I worked from co-working spaces here, and I like it. It wasn't really a holiday, it wasn't really work. I was discovering a new city and doing my job at the same time, and I think it's something that is going to happen a lot in the future. People are asking for that.
Yeah. Great. Well, Lorenzo, I want to riff off of that. You know, Eric mentioned a social contract that, you know, once corporate slavery was the norm. Corporate slavery is what our parents' generation aspired to. It's certainly my parents. And, you know, when you work for the same employer most of your entire life, and of course there was all these assumptions built into the corporate model, built into the office model. And Lorenzo, I'd like you to talk, I guess, a bit about how that social contract has changed. If that contract were still in place, there would be no such thing as co-working. We'd still be going to the office. So why is it that we're looking for multiple spaces? Why are we looking to engage at the city? And the other part of that I thought that Eric mentioned was interesting was, you know, is that to do large projects you need trust. doing solo work, floating around the city or working in small spaces is one thing. How do we build organizations that can really sort of do that? How do we build larger purpose out of it? You work with some of the biggest companies out there, Nike and others. So how do you see that new model of work working with large-scale projects and large-scale companies?
Great. So good morning. Thanks for having me here. Thanks everyone for being here as well. I think there are different ways you can answer that question, right? I think the social contract it's being reconfigured as we speak, partly because of changes in the corporation, but partly because of behavioral changes as well from the people who work. So I think from an existential perspective, I think a lot of people are asking themselves, to what extent is my work aligned with my values, with things that I'm genuinely interested in? And when people ask themselves that, they realize that there's a certain amount of dissonance between their view of the world and their personal values and those that they're defending, in a sense, when they're working for a corporation. So that changes the nature of work as well, because it changes the nature of what you are willing to do over time. And I think that for a long time, people were just robots in automatic pilot, and they were just following protocols which were imposed top-down in very hierarchical command and control structures. And that's clearly changing because we're starting to understand that that's just not coherent, that's just not sustainable. So I think from an existential perspective, we have this major shift that's underway. From a functional perspective as well, I think a lot of people are asking themselves, how expensive and how time-consuming is it getting to travel from point A to point B? So there's this tremendous amount of pressure for employees to produce, and yet they have less time to produce. And it's also becoming somewhat economically inefficient as well for corporations to sustain a huge workforce that spends maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours in São Paulo getting to and from work. So from an efficiency point of view, I think there are also some deep, deep implications. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about, which I think is extremely relevant, is the extent to which these traditional workplaces are actually helping the market become more creative. Because these structures, they don't foster a spirit of creativity. Much on the contrary, they inhibit different cognitive connections so that you can arrive at different alternative scenarios for the work that you're actually producing. So it's actually in the best interest of corporations to allow their employees to mingle in other types of environments that are inspirational and that will help them tap into their creative side. If not, again, we're in this modus operandi where we're just following rules and protocols, and we're not really tapping into our own intellectual repertoire in order to produce what we're expected to produce. Now, how do organizations do that? Some large corporations have realized that they're so big that it's very hard to be creative and innovative and to have a workforce that's happy with the working environment. So what they've done is they've created these silos within the larger organizational structure that operate under very different rituals and protocols. These organizations are called ambidextrous organizations. They're organizations that are huge and that have all the inertia, which is very characteristic of these large organizations, but they have smaller groups which are detached from the physical environment of this large organization, where you dress differently, where the ambiance is different as well, where the working hours are different, and where the teams are much more multidisciplinary or even transdisciplinary. So that's an up-and-coming trend in these larger corporations.
That's great. Well, moving beyond the corporation, I want to go to the city, because I think it's very interesting that traditionally cities, when it comes to attracting businesses and attracting workers, the traditional model was to throw a lot of incentives and encourage a very large corporation to move its headquarters or some piece there. And then, cities and their economic development officials would declare victory. And then, of course, those cities would be lured away by somebody else in this ongoing process. I was hoping to ask Corey, I'm curious about how Rotterdam is trying to do things differently by encouraging actual workers and activating part of urban space. What can cities do to encourage this new shift of work? What policies can you pursue? How can you help people? And how do you reactivate sort of these parts of the urban fabric that are dead, old forms of work, old factories, everything else? So what can the city do to encourage this?
Well, just let me start by saying that the old economy is still very strong and it's still there. Because if you look at the amount of jobs involved in the old economy, it's a reality. And you can't, of course, you have to think for the future, but you also have to realize what's happening today and what people need today and not only tomorrow. I don't know whether I can have some pictures just to... This is, of course, what Rotterdam is famous for the port. We have a big port. And one of the things we are aiming for is not only not to become the biggest port of the world. We used to be the biggest. We're not anymore. We want to be the most sustainable port in the world. So we're shifting now to a different way of work, different competences needed, and more ICT-based competence, for instance, if you just look at sustainability and making the best of what you can do in a sustainable way. And the same goes for the care sector, which is also a big sector when it comes to the Netherlands. An increasing demand for new cure and care technologies, but also more and more personalized. So we have to rethink the whole structure of the cure and care sector as well in the city. It's getting more and more do-it-yourself care. We don't want to spend so much money on it anymore. So it has to do with taxes as well. I'm not sure whether... This one? Yeah. So that's the second part we're working hard on. And the third economic sector of quite some importance are the services. And you can see that in the cities it's getting more and more personalized. And it's going local, actually. If you just look at what people want, they want it at the moment they want it, and they wanted it close by, they wanted it nearby. They don't want to wait for it. They want to have it just in an instant. And, well, I can really easily relate to what Lorenzo said, that the big companies actually work closely together to transform, to make their transitions from the one sector to the other one. So we have a lot of young professional networks working together on issues together from the different sectors with universities, with applied services. So it's building up new ways actually in doing business in the city as well. But also involving youngsters at a lower skill level, because that's one of the main problems we have. We have a lot of people trained for communication services, social services, but we have a lack of technical people, technical skilled people. So one thing we do is actually building a tech shop. It's in a former part of the harbor, of no use anymore, in really involving young people with businesses in building new products like electric scooters, for instance, or 3D printers, using in all kind of new products to involve them and to interest them in technical skills. So this is just one way to produce some novelties. And this is the last slide I wanted to show, because it says a lot about how you should also rethink urban planning in a city like Rotterdam. It was bombarded in the Second World War, so we had this center full empty, and we had this top-down plan. We had a lot of nice architects coming in and building these wonderful buildings, skyscrapers in the city. But they're not linked to each other. And two architects actually... They went into a completely empty office building near the central station. And they really tried to transform it into a working place for all different persons who want to be creative on any subject, actually. And there were just two of them in this really dreadful old office building, and it was at the list to demolish. But thanks to the crisis, we didn't have the money to really demolish it, so it was really standing there. So then they took the time, they used it very wisely. They transformed the complete building into opening it up, and a lot of different new startups are now in this building. But it was not enough for them, because they are architects. They wanted to make new connections between the buildings and between different neighborhoods, especially from the center to the northern part of the town. And they came up with this idea of this wooden bridge, you see, with all kind of parks just alongside. And they involve everybody living in these neighborhoods, coming from Turkish minorities who wants to have a space to barbecue in their own way, to a discotheque who wanted to have a public space with other people mingling. So they build it up very, very slowly. So you have to be patient, because it's bottom up, and they involve a lot of people. And actually, you can see that they're also the response in the city to these kind of projects. It's not only positive. We all receive a lot of negative impulses as well, because it's so new. Not everybody relates to this new way of thinking and this new way of working. So I think it's important to involve a lot of people in really getting it slowly done. It's not something you can do easily just in 1 day or 2 days.
Great. Well, thank you for that. One question I guess I want to that comes out of this, opening discussions here, is a discussion, the discussion of the need for multiple spaces, the discussion of all these sorts of uses across the city. And yet, Worko's, of course, still, pushing back against, Ito's clients pushing back against him on wanting to do things traditionally. I guess the way of asking is, has the office building as we know it kind of failed? And I mean this as a provocative question in the sense of, as Lorenzo hit the nail on the head there, companies are looking for multiple spaces in which people can be creative. And the office, as Ito pointed out, it was designed in a pre-electrified age where they were factories for moving paper around because we did not have the communication tools to do that necessarily. So a question for the panelists is can we design the space for work? Do we have to find the spaces in which that we're most comfortable in doing work, or can we set out to design, as you tried to, a better cubicle in this? Because I think of another example of this was in London last fall. Boris Johnson, the mayor, announced that in Silicon Roundabout, their neighborhood where all the technology companies are, they would spend £50 million on building this big white glass cube that would be the sort of technology hub for the entire Silicon Roundabout. The reaction of all the technology companies there was something a mix between horror and disgust, that they would drop this because they find they do their best work in little old offices and the pubs and meeting each other on the street. And so I guess one question for the panelists is how do we have more of the latter? How do we design neighborhoods, or how do we encourage neighborhoods and design these spaces where people can meet that aren't over-designed, that aren't these sort of horrible offices? I don't know if anyone would like to jump in here, but this,
me, please.
Please.
Well, I think that's one thing we have to learn. It's not so much about these big plans. You can plan ahead for 5 or 10 years. You have to be more flexible, and you have to be in tune what's happening in the city and what ideas people come up with themselves, and make sure that you're not in the way. And it's a complete different role for governments because we are used to being the one who's calling the shots. And we're not, well, you can easily argue whether we had this seat. But still, if you look at this time now, you have to come up with different sort of partnerships. We're not calling the shots anymore.
Great. Anyone else?
No, I just think that the primary message of mutinerie, which actually means mutiny in English, is not just that everybody's going to work this way. It's not that. It's just about do you like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think we need companies a lot. We need companies more than ever. It's not the problem. I think maybe 30-40% of the population is going to work from these new kind of spaces. But what I think is that the impact of what we are learning through co-working is a lot greater than just co-working spaces. It's just that I think companies are going to get inspired by this new way of working, and maybe instead of building just one big building, they're going to build a hub around which employees would gravitate. So they would come here to fine-tune the vision, to share the ideas that they've been collecting in different ideas, in different places, meeting different people. But they would come here to make some meetings and to discuss the company vision and the company essence. And you can imagine, headquarters that maybe can hold 30-40% of the workforce, because most of the time the workforce is split on different spaces. You still need these moments of when people come together and share things. It's just that the function is different, and the emphasis should be put on the social interaction and how people socialize and get to know each other in the office, rather than just the production of the work that can be split and produced all over the planet.
Go ahead.
And just to add on that, I think the office building was very appropriate for the industrial area, right, where you wanted to group as many people together as possible, put everyone on an assembly line, and try to get as much output as possible. But what that caused was a certain disconnection between the office environment and the world outside the office. So you had huge corporations investing billions of dollars in products and services that are completely disconnected with our realities. 90% of products and services that are commercialized globally, they don't stay in the market for more than 1 year. So you have to ask yourselves, what is driving the innovation and the research and development in these corporations? And my hypothesis is that because people are so sheltered from the real world, they're investing in ideas and in products and services that just don't resonate with us. So I think we're facing new challenges as a society, and we need to make these people more human, and we need to connect them with their clients in a much more authentic way.
I think unintentionally that was the best indictment of Silicon Valley I've heard recently, designing products in a little bubble. Well, one question that is, it seems to be a given of everyone on this panel that the future of work is inherently social and inherently about proximity, which is interesting to me because this was always assumed that cities were a relic of a lack of telecommunications. I mean, Marshall McLuhan in 1970 famously declared that cities would die in the electric age. In 1995, George Gilder, a Silicon Valley prophet, declared that cities were, again, the sort of the burnt-out hulks of factories. Essentially they would go away because we would have infinite bandwidth to do anything. And with apologies to anyone from Cisco in this room, there's still a very large technology presence that is betting on telepresence and video as a major collaboration tool. I'd be curious if what anyone on stage thinks about what is going to be the role of these technologies in this. It's going to serve some function, but none of us believe that cities are going away or that the need to be together is going away.
Yeah, can I?
Please.
It's a very challenging movement. We have a lot of types of work. Okay, we cannot compare. There is not one solution for a miracle solution for one type of work. So there is many types of, and the city, and the type of the city that we are living in are designed in the past and not probably really organized in a sense that can facilitate our life. So that's the big problem. Looking for old cities or small communities, you see that they are working very well, okay, and people are happy there. So in my point of view, even living on the city and working on the city, probably, and what we are seeing right now, and we see in some of this solution in Singapore, in some other places, is to repeat this model and create a model that is, let's say, a compact, most popular city in just one block. So, and repeat this in many other places, in many parts of the city. This is what I'm thinking looks like the future, okay? But all the predictions that everybody done in the past, and you see that, nothing happened. They told that the world is going to finish some months ago, and didn't happen, so we're still here. So everybody predicts some things that in the way or the other moving around. So we are a creative animal, okay? And we are accustomed to change our mood, to change our way of live, and to change our way to work. I'm very impressed with my grandson that with 1.5 years already take the telephone and things. So this is so, the digital technology is part of his life. So we don't know yet what's going on the mind of all the human beings. So it's a changing, and I believe that also, as you say, that the companies make service, make works didn't last. That's why that's the challenging. So there is a lot of different types of work. I can guarantee that here that everybody works in a different, not in a different way, but has different way to works. And even in a big company or even in a small company, if you don't have a rule, you have a way to be more creative.
Please.
Well, it's not only about technology, it's also about responding to technology in a quite different way. If I look at the popularity now of having beehives in the center of the city, of having urban farming in small plots, actually in highly urbanized surroundings, then you see that people respond in a way, in very many different ways actually, and doing it at the same time by using their iPad, their iPhone, and then having an hour in spending time with their beehive. So it's all true.
Yeah. I'd say that the problem with predictions and provisions is that it tends to be too romantic. You know, to make the headlines, you got to predict that everything's going to change and the work is going to die, and it's just not. The reality is a lot more complex than that. Actually, it's just when you're doing co-working and you've got lots of people asking you questions, and they want you to say that everybody's going to work this way. Like it's really like
I'm trying to get you to say that.
No, you didn't try, but. No, but it's romantic to say that, and actually the reality is that I think what's important is to have a certain attitude when things are changing so fast. When all the tools we're using did not exist even 10 years ago, you cannot make any good prediction. The only thing you can do is to manage a certain uncertainty through a certain attitude toward what's happening and toward things, and I think being networked to a lot of people helps you doing that because it offers you a lot of options, and then you navigate into the unknown, and you try to identify where you should go next year. I never did a plane more than with a forecast more than 2 years in the future, because otherwise I don't know.
No. Well, one question for you and Lorenzo quickly. And Lorenzo, if you want to take this first, I'd be remiss. This can't be a conference in 2013 if I don't ask about 3D printing. We just have to. And this sort of ties into Corey's point about urban agriculture as well. It's interesting, of course, that in the U.S. in particular, cities nearly died in the 60s and 70s because of deindustrialization, and we moved out all of the factories out of it. And then, of course, then we had post-industrial cities, which was all going to be based on knowledge work, which is what we've talked about. If you have a laptop, you can do work. But now there's, of course, this whole policy emphasis on how do we bring back manufacturing into the city of war, because we realize we need to have a manufacturing base for this. So I'd be curious, we were discussing this a bit beforehand, if you have any thoughts particularly on actually sort of penetration of 3D printing. How will 3D printing and manufacturing, distributed manufacturing in the city, actually look at scale? Because right now we have all sorts of really cute projects, and we've talked a lot about, we have maker spaces and tech shops. Do you have any particular visions on how this could scale up into a new form of urban manufacturing? Lorenzo, if you want to take it, I'd like to hear Eric too.
I think it's extremely dramatic. I think even though 3D printing is at the beginning of its journey, I think it definitely has the capacity to shift the power balance between those who consume and those who produce, because basically 3D printing brings the power back to the consumer in a sense, right? In this do-it-yourself kind of model. So I think it has tremendously dramatic implications. The question is, there are certain technologies that are embedded in 3D printing, like coding, like broadband eventually, and things like that, that also need to be developing at the same pace. And I think the extent to which all those technologies, they evolve together, that's when we're going to see things really shifting.
Well, I think 3D printing is also going to impact really largely how things are done. Not everything at all. But I see some very concrete applications, for instance, on maintenance and reparation of things. For instance, you break a part of your bike, maybe you can print it. You can imagine some washing machines where the suppliers would just put all the parts online, and when you break something, you can print it. So I think it's gonna have some implications. It's gonna be surely a two-tier system, a bit like the normal printing, actually. Maybe you've got one at home that can do minor things like fixing handles and fixing your bike. And maybe when you got to go to a larger scale, then you talk to professional 3D printers to print really like I don't know, you can even print chairs or whatever. What's really interesting, I think, is for modern economies is that it can really be relocated in Occidental countries, in West countries, I'd say, because it's kind of automatic and requires a high degree of knowledge, and that's really interesting in terms of in an ecological point of view, to limit transportations of goods and materials. If the material is improved so that it's really 100% recyclable, then you can really start to have something that is really interesting. We're still going to need some industry. You still need steel and so on, but I think it's going to have some drastic impact on lots of small things, but important things in your life.
One last question. Corey, I wanted to ask you a question before we go to audience Q&A, I guess on sort of the big picture about diversity in workforces. I mean, this is one of the things that's been really interesting is that over time, I think I have a personal theory that I think one reason corporations have embraced diversity is because they understand that if you want to innovate, you have to have as many diverse, multiple intellectual viewpoints as possible, too. There's a very good reason why they've done that. And this is playing out politically in very interesting ways. In the United States, for example, there's the whole battle over the H-1B visa, where the Silicon Valley companies want access to the world's best engineers, and they want it on the cheap, and there's a whole fight about that. I know this is a particular an issue for Rotterdam and the Netherlands in general with that. And so how do you actually build an fully integrated workforce in the city as opposed to trying to cherry pick the world's talent, which I think when it comes to work, that's most cities' immigration strategy is how do we just simply cherry pick either within our own region or country or then overseas as well?
Well, before I can answer, I think I have to explain something. If you just look at the population in Rotterdam, then almost half of the population has a bicultural background. So partly Moroccan, partly Turkish, partly Entails, partly Suriname. So we have the diversity in our own city. And you can really ask yourself, who's integrating into who? Because it's a total new sum up of the population already there. And it also causes, of course, a lot of questions about what is the Dutch nationality. And people relate more easy, actually, to the city. They feel more belonging to Rotterdam, feeling Rotterdammer, than they belong to the Netherlands. Because they also belong to Turkey or to Morocco or any other country, actually. So migration is now a hot issue in the European Union, but also outside the European Union. And I think we have to come up with solutions like, well, we see in a lot of other countries actually happening around the world in really facilitate migration at a higher level. But I don't think it will come up very easily because in a political arena, it's highly debated and highly discussed.
Actually, one last question for you before we go to Q&A. As an architect, of course, you're constantly constrained by your clients. You can't force ideas on them. You can only try to suggest. My question is, if you had to design an ideal workspace beyond just the desk you design, what would it look like? What would be, from your perspective, the ideal place to do work if you could get your clients to go along with anything?
Okay, as I told you, there is many kinds of companies.
Yes.
It's different if you're doing a bank or a lawyer office or a technology company. The other day, they asked me, okay, no, this is the office of Google. How you think that? Oh, it's nice because his color is creative.
And we need foosball tables and we need, games, yes,
games,
and slides.
That's stuff. Okay, so let's put this in the office of a lawyer office and propose that. What's happened? You go into the lawyer's office, say, okay, I'm not going to contract this guy because this is not the same thing that match. So there is not one way. As I told you, there are maybe 4 types of companies. The creative, the collaborative, companies that are producing things together and company that has to invent things. Okay? So these 4 types maybe is just in one company, but sometimes are different companies that has to do different types of work. So you have to, let's say, put a good way to make these companies get work. Okay, so big corporates maybe sometimes has different thinking about what is their culture, what they want from the employees, and you have to follow some of those rules, and you propose some of what's coming up, what is the new solution for technology. But I believe that some companies don't want to invent too much, okay? Because there is some risks of changing too much. So they manage this changing with a little caution. So it's not, okay, let's go to make an office equal to Google because that's the way to do it. That's not the way to do it.
There's still plenty of people who think that, however.
Yeah. This is, playground is one thing, technology is another. Everything is a little bit different from one company to the other.
Great. Opening up now to audience questions. Does anyone have a question? Would anyone like to ask anything? I see one in the back and then one in the front. So we'll get these two first and then over
Hi.
here.
My name is Alessandro Smampato. I'm an architect from São Paulo. I think we're talking about here is how work means for different companies, as Edu Rocha told us. Because I think there's a mood of faking in this area, because every company fakes that, we want innovation and we want new ideas, but we don't want to change anything. And people fake that they are proactive and interested in the company, and they are having a misery day. So, in fact, when you choose people in your office to have lunch, it's not people you like most, but people you hate less, mostly. The environment, it's fundamental to it's a symbol of what happens and builds up what work means to people. And we are privileged in this matter because we're talking about works with ideas mostly, but we still have factories to design that are disattached to this environment that we're talking about, and they're getting more and more separated to this. We're separating completely all the subject, because we can be offices now. If you go to the street connected, you can have an office. So my question is, how and for Lorenzo especially, do you believe that companies can be split up in small pieces around the city, and also for corridors to be more flexible? For example, it's for mobility also, for not making people travel so much.
Yeah, I think it's no longer a matter of whether they're capable or not. They must. I think the traditional models, they're already overdue. They're done with. We now have to help organizations take the first few steps in the direction of something which is radically different. So you're absolutely right in saying that the environment is very conducive to the culture of the organization. And we have new cultures that are emerging now. New cultures that are based on more collaborative work, more transdisciplinary work. And so if the environments don't correspond to that, like you said, there's an incoherence between what these leaders expect from their workforce and the types of environments that they provide for them. Now, I think that granted factories, when you go into a factory, you really ask yourself, to what extent is this at the service of creativity, well-being, and just an overall, quality of life? I think even in those kinds of environments, it's very possible for you to ritualize certain things and introduce certain protocols that make the spirit of that place somewhat different, right? Obviously, when you're working in a startup environment, it's very easy to innovate. You can have a Google type of environment. But when you're in a place that employs maybe 10, 15,000 people who go to work every day, it's harder to do that. But it's not impossible. And that's the point. Sometimes it's the conjunction of a few very minor things that together create a different type of environment and a different type of culture. So I think it's long overdue. Companies need to do this.
We had another question up here in the front. And just
it's happening also. Yep. Because you asked me what are the experiences in Rotterdam. It's happening also. Big companies, they turn into new offices, small offices in the center of the city. And they used to have these big offices just at the surroundings of the city. So it's happening already. And I totally agree with Lorenzo. They need to. It's not a question. It's only a question how to. And can they really speed up? Because they have to do it faster than they can, actually.
Let me just add that. It's an economic issue, really. Productivity's down. Inefficiencies are high. Turnover is high. People are disenchanted with their workforce, with their work. There's a very interesting statistic that in the U.S., work has a 20% approval rating. 20%. So that's 1 of every 5 people actually are engaged with what they do. That's very worrisome.
Please, we have a question here in front.
Hello, my name is Luis and I'm an architect. I live close to São Paulo, and my question is, I mean, we do see that office buildings are changing, and mostly due to the change in the need. We've got new technologies, we've got new possibilities, and if we get down to earth on this, we'll find out that most of what we do today is exchange information. So when we design nicer offices, we're actually looking for more productivity, and we don't really think, maybe as a side effect, we'll have happy collaborators and workers, but probably what we're looking at is the need to become more efficient. What I would like to know is if any of you have any previous experiences that you'd like to share with us related to public buildings, because municipalities and public buildings don't really have to be competitive. They own the market, or their market. Do any of you have any experience on that?
I think Corey's perfect for this question.
Yes, actually we're now building the largest office space in Rotterdam, and it's a wonderful design by Rem Koolhaas of OMA Architects. And it's meant to be for the people working for the municipality. And at the same time, we have a lot of experiments going on in the city where people from the municipality are not working in their official places anymore, but they work just anywhere in the city, spread it around. So we have both ways actually at the moment. So I think that's a wonderful feature of the transition we are now into, because we don't know what will be the goal of it at the end of it. So it's happening at the same time. Yeah.
I would just argue that whether you're a public servant or a private employee, essentially you still want to feel good about the place that you work at. So more important than being competitive is having a workforce that goes to work happily and leaves the office happily as well.
We had a question over there, and then there was someone over here, and we'll go for it.
Hi, Robert Barnard with Youthful Cities. We're ranking the top 25 or some of the biggest cities in the world from a youth perspective. And when you talk to young people, sort of 15 to 29-year-olds, one of the key things they're looking for in cities is a great place to work. So the question to the panel is it actually flipping over where it used to be youth had to scream and shout to get places to think about them? Is it now moving into to a place where youth are now the competitive advantage for cities, and the cities that do the best job at creating places, creating opportunities, inspiring entrepreneurship are going to actually bring the best youth to those cities, thereby creating the cities of the future?
Yes, I think so. I think your hypothesis is absolutely right. I think to the extent that these cities foster a spirit of innovation and that allow young people to work collaboratively with distributive power, embedded in this culture where these technologies are at the service of people's lives, I think, yeah, of course, that's going to be very attractive for millennials and for the Gen Y people.
Maybe something that I would add is that I've heard a lot during this whole meeting the idea of competition between cities, and like who's going to attract the most young people and who's going to attract the more jobs. And I mean, it's a reality. But we talk quite few about the collaboration between these cities, and we are all here exchanging ideas, trying to do things together in the different cities. And I think it's really important. I mean, I see myself as I was living in different cities in my lifetime. And I like that these cities are different, offering different things. I like that they've got a specific vibe. Like there's a vibe in Sao Paulo that is not the same than in Rio, that is not the same than in Paris, not the same in Berlin. I mean, I think it's something valuable. But yes, you've got to have this frame. You've got to have these infrastructures that allow you to navigate quite easily, to find a community, to find some energy. I think the most important thing is to vehiculate energy for these young people and opportunities for these young people. Then the rest can vary, like the vibe and the culture is going to be different. That's really good, and I think these young people are looking for experience above all. So you have, as a city, to provide a certain experience, but not has to be the same everywhere.
So, can I say something?
Yeah, please. We have another question over here. Does someone have a hand
Well,
raised?
we've done a lot of work actually in working together with different European cities, especially amongst youngsters.
Yeah.
And it's getting a movement. It started just by some projects, and it is now really starting into a new movement actually within Europe. And they also relate to cities outside of Europe as well. So I think you're quite right. But the characteristics of every city is different. But you have to be able to describe what the character is of your own city, and that have to relate to what youngsters are seeking for. They have to be plausible.
All right. We have
Hi, my name is Natalia. I'm a journalist. We spoke about the future of work in people's scale and companies' scale. I would like to ask your opinion about where will money come from in this future? Is this changing? I mean, there are lots of crowd-funded projects in Brazil nowadays. I know that there's a bridge crowd-funded in Rotterdam as well. Is this going to change as well, and how, in your opinion?
Well, it was actually the bridge I showed you in the picture, and everybody in the audience can buy a plank in this bridge, in the second part of it, for 25 euros. You have your name engraved in Rotterdam for the rest of your life, so it's still going on. But I think what's more interesting is not the crowdfunding part, but it's the crowdsourcing part. It's not about the money anymore. It's about exchanging services. It's about really into getting community services as well, at neighborhood level, but also beyond neighborhood level. And it will really reshape also cities in the future. I'm quite convinced. It's not only about money anymore.
The question I've got with crowdfunding is, I love it. We did lots of things about crowdfunding in our space. The thing is, I'm wondering about the scale that you can have with crowdfunding, and to which extent can you? First, it applies to a certain type of project that has to be a bit sexy. Like, has to be a bit it has to appeal to people. And there are some things that are not appealing at all, but are very useful. That's the first thing. So, how do you finance these kind of stuffs? Like the clean water system. It's not very sexy, but it's very important. And then the other thing is the scale. The big projects that I've collected on Kickstarter, lots of money, like 25 million or something like this, were actually projects that were already financed or already made a step further. Or if they didn't, they had to have a magnificent communication campaign that requires some money. So it helps for a lot of things. It helps to kickstart some things, but at a certain point, it's not the one-fits-all solution, I guess.
Other questions? Still have one over here?
Hi. My name is Ash Mishra. I'm an SME operating in Asia and in Europe. And my question is this. Is this not really about the culture of work in the sense of an organization? What are the values that are really important? For example, if you're a company and you want to be sustainable and you want to last the next 10 years, you want to engender trust in your employees. You want to build values within the company that allows you to survive. But your model presumably is driven by the nature of the contract. In other words, people just come in and out of work. So how does a firm survive in this environment? And the second part is, we're getting older. We're living longer, and yet in other parts of the world we have baby booms. Neither one of those strategies seems to fit into this formula. So what do you think?
I'd like to take the first half of that question because I think there's some very interesting experiments underway in that regard. And perhaps the most interesting one is taking place in Las Vegas, where Zappos, the online retailer, is essentially trying to merge with the city. It is a company that is going to move its headquarters into the former city hall, and the founder of Zappos, who sold out to Amazon, is taking his personal fortune and building an ecosystem of startups and services and small businesses and charter schools, and is essentially funding a mini city in the middle of downtown Las Vegas, away from the casinos, to sort of serve his company and serve the surrounding residents. And it's very curious how that will turn out, because he's very explicitly doing this because he realizes there's limits to what the corporation can do and last. He's trying to build a larger ecosystem around it that can nourish and cultivate and help his company grow beyond just living in a suburban office park, which is where they are now. I think this can be very good for a company. What I'm very hesitant about is what this means for the city, because they're essentially building a startup city, as he would tell you, and it acts and it looks like a startup. And it's very sort of purpose-driven. It's not the open-ended cities where everyone gets to do what it is they love. And so that's sort of one response to that sort of thing in terms of applying a culture directly onto a city and a place. The second part, I don't know if the panelists have anything on that, but that immediately is what I thought of with your first part of the question.
What I can tell you about sustainability and how the companies are worried about that is that right now in Brazil, the good news is there is a lot of worry about sustainability. So I think that's the first step. They are really worried about sustainability. They want to do things that... so this is a driving very important right now. So it's beginning a big movement about that. They are worried about that. And so that's, I think, is the first step to start thinking about what your proposal are. You know, so if you don't have this, we don't have even the company who is interested on moving. But there's a lot of companies who are changing some way of working, some way of having the driving how to take care of the people. The problem is there is a lot of laws in Brazil that complicates a lot of ways to work, and that's probably one of the part that is non-creativity in the sense that we want. Okay, so the laws in Brazil to hire employees are very complicated. Okay, so that's why probably we are, let's say, 1945. Okay, and that is a problem. Okay, that's experience in Brazil.
If I can take two of the words that you used, and then be a bit provocative. You talked about values and you talked about sustainability. In a 30 to 50 year time projection, I think when we talk about the future of work and values and sustainability, we can come to the conclusion that the future of work is non-work. Because if we can find a way to engage ourselves in things that we actually love to do, then perhaps we'll be resignifying what work is. And it will no longer be seen as a sacrifice, somewhere where we need to go for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day before we can then switch off and be the normal people that we like to be. So if we can align work with life in a projection of 30 to 50 years, I think that's sustainability. It's doing something that you're passionate about, that you believe in, and that helps you evolve as a human being.
The other thing that I would add is I find it strange that, I mean, values are the most important thing that a company has to offer. And I think it's even more true in when people can leave you whenever they want, whenever they like, you know. If people are flexible, working on their own, if they won't need them to stick to your project, it's because you've got something to say that the others don't have to say. It's the difference between a leader and a manager. You've got to be a leader to have people around you supporting your projects and working like they don't work with the others for your project. And I think actually it's the contrary. It's not about values that you just write in a paper and that is printed in some leaflets that are distributed to employees that don't even believe in these words and that are actually disgusted by the fact that it's written and it's not applied. I think when you can leave, it's like in a relationship. When you can leave whenever you want, it's a bit different. You know, you've got to stick to your values, and words have to have meaning.
Well, I just read recently that teams do their best work, do their best collaborative and creative work often over food, and so I think with that, it's time for lunch. So, may I have a hand of applause for our panel? Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for listening.